In the days before penicillin was discovered, my great-grandfather, George Garnett, died at age 37 from complications arising from pneumonia. He left my great-grandma Annie with 5 children, 12 and under, and a baby on the way. That was January 1923. And before the year was out, Grandma Annie had sold the farm at Beulahville, moved to Floyd Avenue in Richmond, Virginia, and found a new husband and had another baby on the way. When Annie first came to town, she started taking in boarders to help meet expenses. Mr. Hopkins, 8 years Annie's junior, was a house contractor and a widower whose young wife had died in childbirth. He was one of those boarders. They got married, eventually moved to a larger quarters on Lamb Avenue, and lived together for the next 45 years. And they added 3 more kids to Annie's 6. I was 9 years old when Mr. Hopkins keeled over from a heart attack. I never knew him very well. And when I was old enough to understand such things, I wondered why a 25-year-old man would be willing to take on the responsibility of a ready-made family with a wife and 6 kids. But today I'm willing to concede that love might have had something to do with it. But whatever the reason, I'm glad he did. My father loved Mr. Hopkins. He didn't call him Grandpa or Step-Grandpa or anything like that. He called him Mr. Hopkins. And I think everybody did. He was a good-hearted man who could have stepped out of a John Prine song. His tools were his livelihood, and no one used them but him. He worked 6 days a week and brought home about $1 an hour, which wasn't too bad for those days. He was a man's man, and on Saturday nights, after working all week, he liked to drown the stress of the week in a bottle of rye. He worked all week to support his family, but Saturday nights were his. But one Saturday morning in 1944, my father awoke to the sound of hammering in the yard. He found Mr. Hopkins building a picket fence around the backyard, so my dad's little brother Dan wouldn't wander off. Grandpa Joe was in the army overseas, so Grandma Helen was holding things together on her own. Mr. Hopkins, her stepdad, knew it would ease her burden, knowing Dan was safe in the yard. So he showed up with the necessary lumber and tools to make it happen. He saw a need, and he stepped in to fill it. Mr. Hopkins enlisted the aid of my dad, who was 10 years old at the time. He had him help dig the holes for the fence posts, and then Mr. Hopkins showed him how to cut pickets. And he let him use his saw. Then Mr. Hopkins secured each picket at the top and bottom with a single nail. And he showed Dad how to come along behind him and double secure the pickets with a second nail, top and bottom. Well, Dad and Grandma Helen painted the fence later that week. A couple of years later, when Dad and Dan were getting older, Mr. Hopkins built another bedroom on their house where an old porch had been. You know, growing boys, they need their space. And you know, he helped his family however he could, and sometimes only as he could. I know from conversations with my dad in his last days that Mr. Hopkins, in spite of his flaws, was one of his heroes. But that doesn't mean as much today as it did a few generations ago. Our heroes have changed. Today, people think of heroes as folks with capes and superpowers, people who hit a lot of home runs or sink a lot of baskets. Today's heroes are celebrities and superstars, and for the most part, fictional characters. I mean, they're admired for meaningless feats for which they often are unreasonably compensated. But when faced with a lack of true heroes, I guess we'll settle for something else. It used to be that heroes were men and women who did brave, noble, or self-effacing things that served as a model for behavior that we might hope to emulate. You know, George Washington, who never told a lie. Stonewall Jackson, who said, "Duty is ours, consequences of the Lord God's." Lou Gehrig, the ball player who publicly faced his own death with courage and encouragement when he said, "Today I am the luckiest man in the world." And Mr. Hopkins taking on the responsibility of 6 kids and their mom. These were the people we might someday be. These were the values we might someday profess. But today we choose heroes for accomplishments and behavior we could never attain, and in many cases wouldn't want to. We seem to have come to equate celebrity with worthiness and sports prowess with high attainment. Our heroes are not undisputed as of old, and they're not necessarily the type of people we'd want our children to be. In contrast, the church has always had its own heroes, people we call saints. These are men and women who lived and died professing their love of Christ and serving those that God put in their way. We all know the big ones: St. Francis, who founded a monastic order; St. Peter, who was the rock on which Christ built his church; St. Paul, one of the movers and shakers of the early church; or St. Thomas Aquinas, one of the great intellects of the church; St. Patrick of Ireland, the inventor of green beer. There are many, many more named saints in the church, but a list of them would not comprise all the saints that we celebrate today. All saints would include those servants of God who profess the name of Christ and live in the service of God and His creation. In short, saints are all Christians who live as Christians or die as Christians. And while today, all saints is typically a celebration of the latter, those who have gone before us, we cannot overlook the obligation that we have to be living saints here and now, in this time and in this place. The people we meet every day in the street, or the post office, or the diner, or the library, or at work, these are real people with real problems and a real desire to connect to you and me. The love of God that is in us is within their reach. They can see it. Maybe they're drawn to it. But we must step up and be the heroes and put ourselves on the line. And like Mr. Hopkins, anticipate the needs of those we love and take on what others would not. You and I and our fellow lovers of Christ may be the best hope for folks around us. Especially in this time where, frankly, heroes are so lame. People want something. Someone that they can look up to. Something to inspire them and let them know that they too can do something worthy. And we, the humble saints of God, we have Christ to give them. We have the cross for them to look up to. We have the atoning sacrifice of Christ's death on the cross. A death that was defined by great pain and humiliation and was undertaken for the love of us. And we have Christ's resurrection. His putting at naught death. We have all of this to give those in need as the example of the world's greatest hero, Jesus. And for that, thanks be to God.